Welcome to the Economy Magazine. I'm Binyamin, Tjong-Alvares with economic news. On today's show, we keep our focus closer to home. We start with a look at an Arab-Israeli high-tech incubator in northern Israel, review the unbearably high cost of living in Iran, and explore the sustainability of a recent rebound in Egypt's tourism sector. First, the headlines. U.S. President Barack Obama on Monday defended his proposed budget loaded with spending and tax reforms at the Department of Homeland Security. The $4 trillion budget includes $478 billion to upgrade infrastructure and cut costs for childcare and education. Obama's plan would add $474 billion to debt, overturning mandatory caps on defense and other spending. The plan would partially be funded through an increase in the capital gains tax and a one-time 14% tax on the estimated $2 trillion of untaxed earnings held by U.S. firms overseas.
Now, I know there are Republicans who disagree with my approach. And I've said this before. If they have other ideas for how we can keep America safe, grow our economy, while helping middle-class families feel some sense of economic security, I welcome their ideas. But their numbers have to add up.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel, on a visit to Hungary, said Europe must diversify its energy market to reduce dependency on Russian gas. Hungary is a major manufacturing base for German industries, but retains close ties with Moscow and strays from the European mainstream on many policies. Europe must build an energy market based on common pipelines and reverse flow that can be carried out in different directions, Merkel said. Hungary's foreign minister in January said it wants to store more Russian gas after a major pipeline plan was cancelled. Russia's Gazprom has so far stored up to 700 million cubic meters of gas in Hungary since last year.
An internal European market ultimately means that everyone can have access to all energy sources. Nabucco has now come to nothing. South Stream is uncertain. We also have the European structural funds for this and possibilities for European investment. Germany will make an effort to ensure all the member states of the European Union will not be dependent on one energy source.
BP on Tuesday reported a loss for the fourth quarter and said it would reduce spending. The oil giant posted a replacement cost loss of $969 million compared with a profit of $1.51 billion a year earlier. Earnings were hit by write-downs on the value of BP's operations in the North Sea and Angola owing to weaker oil prices. The company also slashed capital spending by 20% as it will reduce exploration spending and postpone upstream projects. A new mega casino opened in the Philippines as the fast-growing Southeast Asian nation ups its bid to become a world gaming destination. The imposing City of Dreams complex required a minimum $1 billion investment by Philippine law. It is the second of 4 mega resorts to open just a few hundred meters from the city's slum communities. But Manila's rise is partially helped by Macau's decline as China's anti-graft campaign widens and Beijing imposes tighter rules for visiting the former Portuguese enclave.
The vision was always to find the greatest locations in Asia to build integrated resorts. And so in order for us to, we've been very selective. I think other than Macau, Philippines and Manila is really the first place that we have, we've decided to go into.
Incubators played a vital part in the creation of Israel's burgeoning high-tech sector. Nazareth, the first accelerator for the dynamic and highly educated Arab-Israeli community of Nazareth, is one of Israel's future powerhouses, which local VCs and international corporations are starting to notice. More details in this report by i24 News reporter Anthony Lesmy.
Production place.
Reem Yunus and her husband are high technology pioneers, co-founding their Alpha Omega company in 1993 after a trip to the United States. At that time, high tech in Israel was primarily related to defense, a sector that Palestinian citizens of Israel have not been in. Nevertheless, they push forward. The company is based in Nazareth and specializes in neuroscience research and scientific engineering.
We have such systems that can neuroscientists use those systems for their research, to know more about the brain, to develop more treatments or medication for the brain.
The company has so far opened 2 laboratories in the United States and in Germany. It's a success that has pushed these 2 to encourage young Arab-Israeli engineers. Alpha Omega has participated in the creation of a startup accelerator in Nazareth called Naseratech.
Typically, we have a huge gap between the high-tech in the center, in Tel Aviv, Herzliya, and the high-tech in the periphery. And speaking about Arab community, the gap is even bigger. But such accelerators and such help funding from the company would sure close this gap.
Naseratech is developed by Tzofen, an NGO that aims to bridge this gap. Today, only 2% of the Arab population of Israel is working in the high-tech sector, though they represent 20% of the citizens of the country. In early January, the Ministry of Economy has awarded $2 million to Tzofen and other NGOs with the aim of developing the high-tech sector in Arab regions in the north of Israel.
Since 2008, we have a successful in this field. When we started, it was about only 300 Arab employees in the high-tech industry.
The NGO has been working with Palestinian citizens of Israel studying science and technology. 80% do not work in the profession they studied, and to avoid being unemployed, they look for work in other sectors. Tzofen wants to change these numbers by giving further training and creating forums for professional networking. Bidat is 24 and just completed his studies in computer engineering. He, like most Palestinian citizens of Israel, struggles to find a place in the startup nation.
High-tech in Israel is very difficult. You need to have 2 or 3 years of experience. When they invite us to that day, so they teach us and tell us how to speak, what the thing that we need to say and what the thing that we don't need.
We believe that integration will not be only in one side, that Arab goes from the villages to the Jewish areas to work. Also, Jewish can come to Nazareth, can come to the Arabs community, to the Arabs area to work. And this is the integration that we want to do it. Jewish and Arab are working together in Nazareth.
Though the political realities in Israel make joint projects tougher to take part in, a revolution may have the opportunity to burgeon in the age of the digital revolution.
Western sanctions and a flawed subsidy reform plan have weighed on the costs of living in Iran for years. But the oil price drop since June last year has posed an even bigger challenge, as oil revenues account for 65% of government revenues. Joining us with more on the situation in Iran is I-24 News reporter Ayman Siksak in Financial Bazaar. Ayman, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So from what I understand, the subsidy reform that was implemented a couple of years back drove up food prices, essentially taking money that would have otherwise gone towards these subsidies, putting it back into the state, but driving up these costs of food and energy and whatnot. What exactly is the story in terms of the cost of living today?
Well, that's exactly what happened. We're talking ridiculous inflation in Iran. Everything's prices are steadily rising right now. There's this report that says in order to live in Tehran as a middle-class family, you need about $3,700 per month, which you'd think is a reasonable amount. But the same report also shows us that a middle-class family in Iran makes a little less than $700 a month, which is less than a quarter of the amount needed to
actually subsist, so to speak. How
in
are
a
you
respectable
doing it?
fashion.
It's unbelievable.
Well, apparently they're not. There is an explosion of homeless children living in Iran. Estimates are anywhere between 60,000 children. That's Iran's conservative estimates. Other rights groups say it's more like 300,000 children living in Iran and making a living by playing music, panhandling, petty theft and crime. There's really no way to survive in the economy as it is. People are reverting to drugs and criminal activity.
Is there any kind of effort being put into this by the government to try to change things, try to reform things? It doesn't seem that way.
Well, this month, the government will give out its third, what it calls, food package to families with low income. This is the third time it's giving out this package. It has worked 2 times before, but it's not a long-term solution for any of these families suffering the huge crisis of inflation. And of course, for them, the everyday people, the oil crisis is not really directly affecting their lives or businesses.
Right.
But the entire country is suffering at large from this, despite Iran's comments recently that it's not afraid of OPEC's decision not to increase output and that it would actually survive with a $25 price per barrel.
Yeah.
Iranians are suffering.
With the new King Salman right now in Saudi Arabia, who has been behind, so to speak, dealing with setting the policy on oil and OPEC and whatnot. I guess we would not necessarily see any easier time for Iran coming up. Is that true?
No, especially when it comes to oil, because there are many factors, including Saudi Arabia, that do not want to see Iran come out of this crisis, obviously for political reasons and Iran's nuclear ambitions. So it will be a long time before we see this inflation.
Well, it sounds to me like there's a lot more to say about Iran, but we're going to shift our focus now back to Egypt, closer to home, and stay with me for a comment on that as well. Egypt's tourism ministry said income from tourism is on the rise after years of political turmoil kept visitors away. But as especially tourists from Arab countries return, geopolitical tension continues to loom.
Egypt has seen tourism decline since 2011 when unrest began and then dictator Hosni Mubarak was unseated. But the Ministry of Tourism says that the downward trend started to turn around last year with a 27% rise in income from 2013 to $7.5 billion. This is good news for the country as tourism is the main source of foreign currency in the state of more than 80 million people.
2010 is the peak year that we used to measure progress, during which we had 14.7 million tourists. This dropped in 2011 to 9.8, then increased once again to 11.5 to 12, then went down to 9.5.
And that number hit 9.9 million last year, up about 4% according to the ministry. This is much needed good news for the country with high homelessness and 13% of the population out of work, and some even seeking employment in war-torn Libya. The years of revolution, political unrest, and violence have marked the country. The security situation in much of the Middle East and in the Sinai Peninsula is tenuous at best in the eyes of potential tourists. Nevertheless, the number of visitors is growing and spending per tourist is up as well.
If we look at the outcome, which I'm going to talk about for a bit because many of you say that the numbers of tourists don't matter. What matters is our income from the tourism movement. There is a clear progress in the outcome that came from tourism in 2014 compared to the year of 2013. And that's because the average spending has increased.
Indeed, the numbers seem to be in Egypt's favor for the time being. But the story isn't over as the country seeks a stable foothold in a stormy geopolitical reality.
Clearly a very difficult situation in Egypt. On the one hand, the numbers are rising. Everybody wants to go back to Egypt, a great destination for a holiday. But we just had a bomb threat also in Cairo today at the airport. What's the problem right now in Egypt?
Well, it remains to be seen how the bomb threat will affect the numbers that we just heard about. But it's interesting to see what the minister has to say about Egypt's tourism on rising. Because for years, Egypt relied on tourism in the Sinai Peninsula. Of course, Israeli tourism in the Sinai Peninsula was also huge. And for the past decade, it has been declining steadily. These are huge numbers that they're missing out on. So it's interesting to see how losing Sinai and with the increase of tourism within Egypt, things may be balancing, but it's not as good as the minister describes. I mean, of course, the ideal situation would be for Sinai to also still be a factor. But it is a fact that people are being attracted to Egypt more and more now with the new administration, with el-Sisi's administration, despite it being a military one, it is more open to Western influences and attracting more tourists.
Right. I guess we're essentially looking at a situation where the government in Egypt has to prove that it can keep the security situation stable enough for tourists to come back.
Well, and it has been having quite a bit of a challenge in doing so. Not sure it's proven that it can handle the situation so far, but it is far more steady than in the time it was during the Arab Spring and the revolt. Sisi's administration seems stable.
Okay. Well, Ayman Siksak, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Binyamin.
That concludes our Economy Magazine, your daily source for economic and financial reports at I24 News. I'm Binyamin Tjong-Alvares. Please do continue watching us, send us your comments, and join us again tomorrow.